There is a prison that has no walls. No guards stand at its entrance. No locks restrain the door. Yet millions live inside it willingly, mistaking it for connection, security, even love. A week before his death, Miyamoto Musashi, the most feared swordsman in Japan, wrote 21 rules for life. It was not a manual for combat, it was a manual for freedom. Among those rules, one stands above the rest in severity: live without attachment. At first glance, it sounds simple, almost harmless, but Musashi did not speak lightly. He was not advising indifference. He was warning against dependence on approval, on comfort, on identity itself. This is the story of a young man who discovered how heavy attachment truly is and what it costs to carry it. Chapter 1. The Invisible Chains. Aiden was 23 years old, raised by honest parents who had given him everything they could. His father worked long shifts in a factory. His mother stood on her feet all day in a small shop. They never complained, but Aiden saw what the future might bring: retirement without security, aging without comfort. He wanted to change that. He wanted to build something that would protect them from the quiet fear of old age. Yet despite this desire, he remained stagnant. His job paid the bills but led nowhere. It was stable, predictable, and safe. After work, his evenings were rarely his own. Invitations arrived daily, and he accepted almost all of them. There were friends with money who traveled freely and spent without calculation. Aiden tried to keep pace, even when it strained his finances. He did not want to be the one who declined. There were other friends who lacked ambition entirely. They lived from paycheck to paycheck without concern for the future. They dismissed planning as unnecessary stress. Aiden listened, nodded, and stayed silent. He feared something more than failure. He feared disapproval. Each time his phone lit up with a message, Aiden felt a subtle tension. If he ignored it, would he seem distant? If he declined an invitation, would he be replaced? So he responded. He attended. He agreed. When rare moments of free time appeared, he felt too drained to use them well. He had purchased courses he never completed. He had ideas he never developed. His energy had been spent managing perceptions. One Saturday afternoon, he decided he would finally focus. He went to the public library, opened his laptop, and prepared to study. Within 10 minutes, his hand reached for his phone without conscious decision. A brief glance became half an hour. The silence of the library contrasted sharply with the noise inside his mind. It was then that he noticed a small black book resting on the neighboring table. Its cover was worn but dignified. Embossed in gold were the words, "Dokkōdō, the way of walking alone." He opened it out of curiosity. The sentences were direct, almost severe. Do not seek pleasure for its own sake. Do not depend on others. Do not cling to life. There was no explanation, no comforting language, only principles. Each line felt like a blade cutting through excuse. A calm voice interrupted him. The book belonged to a young woman named Hana. She had stepped away briefly and returned to find him reading. They spoke quietly across the wooden table. She explained that Musashi wrote these rules shortly before his death. They were not abstract ideals. They were distilled experience. When Aiden confessed that the rule about not depending on others seemed extreme, she corrected him gently. Musashi did not mean isolation. He meant independence of spirit. Do not build your identity on the approval of others. The phrase settled heavily in Aiden's thoughts. Chapter 4. The Weight of Identity. Over the following weeks, Aiden borrowed the book. He read it repeatedly. He began to observe his own behavior through its lens. He noticed how often he said yes automatically, how often he shaped his opinions to match the room, how frequently he chose comfort over clarity. In Bushido, the way of the warrior, identity is forged through discipline. A samurai did not ask, "How will this be perceived?" He asked, "Is this aligned with my path?" Aiden began small. When invitations came during the week, he declined without elaborate justification. He did not argue. He did not defend his decision, he simply chose differently. Some friends questioned him, some withdrew. For the first time, he felt relief rather than anxiety. He realized that much of his exhaustion had come not from work, but from performance. Chapter 5. The Lesson of Detachment. Hana introduced him to her grandparents, who had carried Japanese traditions quietly into their home. Their house was simple, ordered, intentional. Nothing excessive, nothing chaotic. Her grandfather, Akira, spoke slowly after dinner as they shared tea. He explained that attachment is not love, it is fear disguised as affection. When you are afraid of losing people, you begin to negotiate your own values. You soften your edges, you hide your convictions. You become acceptable, but incomplete. Musashi walked alone not because he despised companionship, but because he refused to compromise his path. Detachment is not coldness, it is clarity. If you are attached to approval, criticism will control you. If you are attached to comfort, challenge will frighten you. If you are attached to identity, change will threaten you. Aiden recognized himself in every example. Chapter 6. The Discipline of Separation. Detachment began as a practice. Aiden reorganized his schedule. He limited his social commitments deliberately. He set fixed hours for study and work. When discomfort arose, he remained with it. He did not soothe it immediately with distraction or company. He noticed how often he reached for validation, posting, checking, responding quickly. Each time, he paused. He allowed silence to exist. Zen teaches the concept of ma, the meaningful pause. In that pause, awareness returns. Gradually, he felt stronger, not louder, not more impressive, simply more stable. His business idea, long postponed, began to take shape. He devoted consistent hours to building it. Small clients appeared. He served them carefully. Chapter 7. The Reordering of Love. His relationship with Hana deepened, but without urgency or dependence. They did not seek to complete one another. They chose each other freely. Aiden understood something profound. When you no longer need someone to fill your emptiness, you can finally see them clearly. Detachment allowed him to love without fear of loss. It allowed him to act without fear of rejection. Within a year, his income surpassed his old salary. He left his job calmly. He supported his parents, not from obligation, but from intention. His friendships changed. Fewer remained, but they were real. They respected his boundaries. Chapter 8. The Peace of Musashi. Musashi wrote his final rules knowing death was near. He did not cling to reputation or comfort. He had trained his mind to release what most cannot. Aiden began to understand why. When you are no longer attached to being liked, you speak honestly. When you are no longer attached to ease, you endure difficulty. When you are no longer attached to a fixed identity, you evolve. Detachment does not remove feeling, it removes fear. And fear is the true chain. The ceremony where Aiden later stood beside Hana was simple. When he spoke his vows, he promised to love her not from need, but from choice. It surprised some, but it was sincere. To choose daily is stronger than to cling. Musashi's rule remains severe because it demands self-examination. What are you holding on to that weakens you? What approval governs your decisions? What comfort delays your growth? To live without attachment is not to withdraw from life. It is to stand within it without trembling. Chapter 9. The Fear Beneath Attachment. Attachment always disguises itself as something noble. It calls itself loyalty, love, connection, responsibility. But beneath these names, there is often a quieter force at work: fear. Fear of being alone, fear of being judged, fear of being left behind. Aiden began to see that most of his past decisions had not been acts of generosity, but acts of avoidance. He had avoided discomfort by saying yes. He had avoided silence by filling his schedule. He had avoided uncertainty by staying small. Musashi understood this fear intimately. He fought more than 60 duels, many to the death. A man who faces death repeatedly learns to distinguish between what is real and what is imagined. The greatest enemy is not another swordsman. It is the trembling within. Attachment feeds that trembling. When you are attached to reputation, you fear humiliation. When you are attached to relationships, you fear abandonment. When you are attached to success, you fear failure. And fear makes the hand unstable. Chapter 10. Walking Alone. Dokkōdō translates loosely as the way of walking alone. It does not command isolation from society. It commands sovereignty of mind. To walk alone means that your direction is not dictated by the crowd. It means you can sit in a quiet room without needing to announce your existence. It means your choices are rooted in principle rather than reaction. Aiden tested this in subtle ways. When a social gathering no longer aligned with his priorities, he declined without resentment. When someone misunderstood him, he did not rush to correct the narrative. At first, the silence felt heavy. There were fewer messages, fewer invitations, even moments of doubt. But in that space, something solid began to form. He was no longer constantly adjusting himself to fit expectations. He was beginning to know himself without interference. Chapter 11. The Discipline of Enough. Another of Musashi's rules advises not to collect unnecessary possessions. This extends beyond material objects. It includes obligations, opinions, and emotional burdens. Aiden reviewed his life with care. Which commitments were essential? Which were inherited from habit? Which were attempts to maintain an image? He reduced, not dramatically, but deliberately. He simplified his environment. He simplified his routines. He simplified his goals into clear priorities. In Zen practice, simplicity is not deprivation. It is refinement. When the unnecessary is removed, what remains gains strength. Aiden noticed that his mind grew quieter. Decisions required less negotiation. He was no longer pulled in opposing directions by competing attachments. He had less, but he felt more grounded. Chapter 12. Freedom from Approval. There came a moment when an old friend confronted him directly. "You've changed," the friend said. "You're not as available. You used to be more fun." In the past, such words would have unsettled him deeply. He would have tried to explain, to soften the perception, to reassure. This time, he listened calmly. He acknowledged the change without apology. "I am focusing on what matters to me now," he replied. There was no hostility, no defense, only clarity. That conversation marked a turning point. He realized that not everyone would understand his path, and that was acceptable. Musashi wrote, "Do not act following customary beliefs. The crowd's approval is often given to what is comfortable, not what is true." Freedom from approval does not make you harsh, it makes you steady. Chapter 13. Love without clinging. As his inner foundation strengthened, Aiden's relationship with Hana deepened further. They shared goals, conversations, silence, but neither demanded constant reassurance from the other. They respected each other's solitude. They encouraged each other's discipline. When disagreements arose, they were addressed directly rather than avoided. Attachment often leads to silent resentment. Detachment allows honest dialogue. Aiden understood that true partnership is not possession, it is alignment. He no longer feared losing her because his identity was no longer built upon her presence. And paradoxically, this made the bond stronger. Musashi's instruction not to cling even to life is the ultimate expression of this principle. When you are not grasping desperately, you can engage fully. Chapter 14. The Edge of Mortality. Near the end of his life, Musashi retreated to a cave called Reigondo. There he meditated, reflected, and wrote his final teachings. He was not surrounded by applause. He was not chasing legacy. He prepared his mind for departure with the same discipline he had used in battle. Aiden often reflected on this image, a man who had nothing left to prove, nothing left to grasp, only clarity. He asked himself a difficult question. If I knew my time were short, what attachments would still hold me? The answer revealed areas where fear still lingered. In subtle ways, he continued to refine his discipline. Detachment is not a single decision. It is a lifelong practice. Chapter 15. The Quiet Strength. Years passed. Aiden's business matured steadily. His parents lived more comfortably. His home remained simple and intentional. Externally, his life appeared stable. Internally, it was anchored. He no longer measured his worth by comparison. He no longer chased every opportunity. He chose carefully.
This channel is for those who wants to build discipline quietly. If that's you, hit the subscribe button.